Hello, Indiana Baptists. My name's Rayden Hollis, and I'm really glad to be with you guys in this breakout today. And chances are pretty good you may have just chosen this breakout simply because it had the word kangaroo in it. And if you did, I applaud you. And I don't want to bury the lead in any way. So I want to tell you right out of the gate exactly why I called this breakout Rent the Kangaroos, or some version of that. Whatever it ended up in production, I'm not sure. But the backstory is this. When I planted my church, Red Hill Church in Edwardsville, in 2015, before we had launched, we heard about some events that our city was doing, and we decided that we wanted to partner with the city. We wanted to do what we could to be a part of what was already going on inside of our city, try to make it better. We did that partly because philosophically, I think it's the way that a church ought to run local missions, but also practically because we had no kids ministry and very little money. So the backstory is this. There was a movie that was going to be shown in City Park in downtown Edwardsville, where my church is located. And we asked if we could be a co-sponsor of that, meaning we just pay half of the fee that's related to renting that particular movie. And of course, the Parks Department said they'd love to have us. So the movie that we had was called Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. If you have kids that are of a certain age, then you're probably familiar with this movie. You may have even read the kids' book along the same title. Well, in this book and in this movie, the kid, who is Alexander, has an obsession with Australia. So our little core team of 6 people got together and we started talking about what do we think about when we think of Australia. And the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Australia, if you're on my core team anyway, apparently, is kangaroos. And so we started talking about trying to maybe get kangaroos. I said, why don't we rent a kangaroo? That'd be super cool. We could have a kangaroo there and maybe kids could pet it and see it. And that's pretty unique, you know? So what do you think? And everybody on the team said, you can't rent a kangaroo. Can't do it. My response to that was, they're not unicorns. Like, they exist. They're real things. Now, can we find one? I don't know. Can we afford one? Probably not, but they're real. So let's see if we can find one. So we went on a hunt. I knew that I was a church planter when I typed into my Google box, rent a kangaroo in St. Louis. So as soon as I hit enter, I was like, this is it. This is the moment that I really become a church planter because I'm doing something completely ridiculous. So I punch it in, we start looking, I tell the team, let's start praying, asking God to give us a kangaroo that we could use for this event. Let's just pray that God gives us a kangaroo. And so our team began praying, we began reaching out to people. In the end, we didn't get a kangaroo. We got 3 kangaroos. 3 kangaroos, plus a whole bunch of other little animals for a petting zoo. We tried to put the kangaroo in one of our church t-shirts, but the owner of the kangaroos said, yeah, you can do that, but they tend to just rip the shirts to shreds and go a little bit crazy. They don't like wearing shirts. So obviously they had already tried something along those lines. So we didn't do that, but we had the kangaroos there. Before we made the leap to actually get the kangaroos, I reached out to one of my buddies, one of the guys who helped coach me through their planting process, and I asked him, should we do this? It's going to be a lot of money. We don't have a lot of money. What do you think? And his response was, if you do this, you'll forever be that church. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, you'll be that church, because people will say, aren't you guys that church that rented kangaroos for that movie that was showing at the park? Yeah, that was us. We were that church. So I want to encourage everyone in this breakout, and the point of this breakout is really just to inspire you and to help equip you to become that church. Whatever that church does in your community, my hope and prayer is that it's going to be your church that becomes that church, that did something exceptional, that just made an impact beyond belief. Now, the question that you might have, if you're sort of a little bit curmudgeon-y, is just, why does it matter? Like, why go through all this effort? It seems like an awful lot of effort. We already have a lot of stuff going on at our church. We don't need one more thing. And I just want to give you some hard truth, if I could. Number one, nobody knows about your church. They don't know. Maybe they know that it exists. Maybe. If you don't believe me, then just go to your local gas station. Go to your local Walmart. If there's a checker, like a cashier that doesn't know you, that doesn't attend your church, just ask them, hey, are there any good churches in town? Do you know anything about any of the churches in town? Ask any average person. They don't know. And let me ask you, what do you know about the worship gatherings of the churches that you don't pastor in your own community? What's it like at the Lutheran church in your community? What's it like at the Catholic church in your community? Maybe there's a Christian Scientist church in your community. Maybe there's a Mormon church in your community. What kind of music do they have? What kind of preaching do they do? What kind of kids ministries do they offer? You probably don't have any idea. I don't know much about the other churches in my community. I know about a few of them because before we launched, we visited some of them. But by and large, I don't know what's happening inside of the doors of the other churches that are in my community. And I am one of the most religiously interested people in my community. People who have no interest in the church have no interest in what's happening on a Sunday morning. The simple truth is this, is that most of our churches could completely disappear. God could rapture them right out of the earth, and people who are living in their cities would not even know that it had happened. They wouldn't even feel the loss. And my desire as a pastor is that if my church were ripped up out of the community, that the community would feel the loss, that they would know, man, something happened. This place, it's not quite as good as it used to be. Maybe they're not going to like what I preach about. Maybe they're not going to like the content of my doctrine. Maybe they're not going to like the way that I view marriage. Maybe they're not going to like some of the thoughts that I have as far as the authority and the inerrancy of the Bible, but I want them to know that they are loved. I want them to know that our church is here and it's here for this city. I mean, that's the point of a local church, right, guys? That's the point of being a local church, is that we'd have a local expression of the gospel. That's why we want to see a multiplying church, that every church could be a multiplying church in every community in North America. That's the dream. That's the goal. We want to see every local church reaching its local context. That's what today is all about. So I want to talk quickly about a few things. I've got some things on the board behind me here, and we're going to walk through some of them. The first one that I want to walk through is called the Ingalls Scale. I first encountered this when I was reading the Master Plan of Evangelism, which is a wonderful little book. And the Ingalls Scale is basically this. It's a scale that goes from -10 all the way up to +3, and it measures, it's just a way of placing people on a grid, on a line that tells you where they are in relation to faith. And 0 is the point of conversion. +3 would be a fully devoted follower of Jesus. So a -10, all the way down over here, a -10 is both a theological and a philosophical atheist. In other words, it's someone who thinks that there is no God, who believes that there's no God, and they actually live their life with integrity, living as if there really is no God. And here's the thing. Most of the activities that are taking place in a local church, like most of the efforts of the local church, take place in this grid right here, from a -1 to a +3. Most of what we're doing as a local church is trying to reach people who have already been reached, and trying to serve people who we're also trying to recruit into service. We don't do very much from the -10 to the -2. There's not a lot of interaction. There's not a lot of engagement. There's not a lot of exposure. Most of what we do, from worship gatherings to small groups, Sunday school classes, kids ministry programs, in fact, most of the programs of our church are targeting people, who are almost at the point of conversion. People who would probably say that they're followers of Jesus, even though they haven't actually given their lives to Christ, all the way up through to people who are actively leading, serving, like multiplying missional leaders, like just the most dedicated and sold out followers of Jesus. So maybe you're sitting there and you go, I'm not really sure that that's actually true. I would encourage you to just think through what's happening in your church right now and ask yourself, is there any reason that someone who is not part of this church would want to come and experience this? Why would they want to be here? We often think about the way that we communicate about our churches, the way that we almost market our churches, is like we have better music, we have better preaching, we have more intimate and authentic small groups. Like, it's just really comparing one steakhouse to another steakhouse. but it's Alan Hirsch, I believe, who said that if we really want to reach lost people, we've got to stop thinking about offering a better steak and instead say, how do we market a steak to people who are vegetarians? People who are philosophically opposed to what we're doing. How would we tell them about what we're doing? Why would they want to come into what we have to offer? So this is what we're going to do for right now. Is I've just written out on my own notes here a few of the main activities, what most churches would even call outreach activities, that would take place at like an average local church. So some of those would be, I'm just going to make a list down here, and then we're going to put them on this grid. Some of those would be worship gatherings, which we'll just call WGs. That's just your Sunday morning or Sunday night worship service. You also have your small groups or Sunday school classes, so we'll call those small groups, Sunday school classes. We also have Vacation Bible School, so we have VBS. And then a lot of churches will have Wednesday night programming that's usually some type of Bible study. So let's put we'll just put Wednesday, just put WED on there. In addition to that, churches often have some kind of like trunk or treat. We're going to just put TR because I started writing and that's what I came up with. And then last, but certainly not least, a lot of churches do visitation. Some kind of visitor follow-up where you go into the homes and try to engage those people with the gospel. And what I have behind me here is an outreach evaluation matrix. And basically what we're looking at is the activities and the events that our church has. How do they fit on this matrix evaluating our outreach? We have exposure, and it goes from low up to high. And then we have relational, and it goes from low up to high. So basically, we're just going to map these out on a grid. Low to high on relational, going up and down. Low to high on exposure, going from left to right as I'm looking at it here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at worship gatherings. Where would we put worship gatherings on our outreach evaluation matrix? Well, first of all, worship gatherings, I'm going to say those are kind of like mid-level relational because there's not a ton of time to talk. And I know in most churches you might have a little greeting time, but it's really just long enough to say, hello, how are you? And every worship leader out there is telling me I got to shake at least 3 to 5 hands. So I really don't have much time to talk. It's really just a lot of fist bumps. Granted, right now, we're not doing any fist bumps. Maybe you do like a leg kick or an elbow or a headbutt, or I don't know for sure what you guys do. But a worship gathering is kind of mid-relational. There's a little time before, there's a little time after, but not a ton of time for us to be able to talk. And then as far as exposure goes, it's a mid to low exposure. It's not a high exposure event because everybody knows there are worship gatherings happening, just like there are television shows on TV. I don't really know what the TV shows are that are on TV, but I know there are TV shows. I don't really know anything about the worship gatherings. I don't know when they are. I don't know where they are. I don't know what they're like. So I know that church probably has worship gatherings. So those are mid-relational and mid to low exposure. So if we're mapping out worship gatherings and we said they're maybe middle of the road on their exposure right here and kind of mid to low on the relational aspect, we might put worship we might put worship gatherings right there. Okay, so we've mapped out our worship gatherings. The next one, our small groups. Let's map out our small groups. Now, small groups are very low exposure, especially if they're done during the week. You do what you can to promote them and to advertise them, but really, most people who live in your community don't know anything about your small groups. They don't know when they meet. They don't really know where they meet, but they're incredibly high relational. A lot of Sunday school classes especially, you'll see people who will stay together for decades. One of the churches that I pastored, we had a group that was called the In-Betweeners, and I said, why are they called the In-Betweeners? Because it was all people, there were 3 couples in that class that had been married more than 60 years. And they said, well, when we started the class, we were sort of in between young married and having kids that were grown, like that were in elementary school. So we were in between. But now we say we're in betweeners because we're in between living and dying. Like we're just teetering on the edge. That was what they said about themselves, not me. But they'd been together for 30, 40 years, some of them, which is just amazing. So very high relational, but very low exposure. So our small group ministry is going to fit somewhere up here, where we're saying lots of relationships being built, deep relationships being built, not a ton of exposure though. And then the next thing on our list is VBS. VBS is a really wonderful event that a lot of churches put on. It's a ton of work, but what happens is you have the same families that will come, the same kids that will come, and everybody in the city knows when the VBS is happening. VBS is high exposure, it's high relational, and let's not lose sight of this, that for a lot of Baptist churches particularly, that's the main place where our salvations are coming from. Like that's the single week-long event that produces the most salvations for us. The problem that we have with the VBS, though, is it's not just our VBS. There's also another church's VBS, and there's also another church's VBS, and there's also another church's VBS. And I'll stop there because I don't have any more marker colors. But what ends up happening is your incredible Vacation Bible School kind of gets washed out with all the other incredible Vacation Bible Schools. And one thing that I've witnessed, I'm sure you've witnessed it too, is that what happens in these types of deals is you have the same families who will come to yours, but they also go to the next one and the next one and the next one. And it's such a well-known thing, in fact, that a lot of churches and a lot of communities will actually coordinate with one another. When are you doing yours? We'll do ours at a different time. And why do we do that? Because we know we're going to reach all the same kids. We're going to reach all the same families. So it might be worth considering the exposure is high, the relationship is high, but is the juice actually worth the squeeze? Well, if a ton of kids are getting saved, then obviously the juice is worth the squeeze. If you're getting a lot of information, doing some good follow-up, then obviously it's worth it. But we want to keep in mind that this can become a white noise kind of situation where there are a lot of churches doing the exact same thing. So it just becomes one more thing that's on a list that really isn't doing anything for your church to help reach the community. Wednesday night Bible study, Wednesday night activities, that kind of thing, not a ton of exposure on those. That's going to fit somewhere close to where our small group ministry is, where our Sunday school classes are, but not quite as relational. So we might put Wednesday night, somewhere around there. And then trunk or treat. Trunk or treats are great. They usually have tons of activity, tons of people will come through, very high exposure, but you don't get to spend a lot of time developing relationships. So we probably put trunk or treat somewhere, like here. A lot of people come to them, and maybe your church doesn't do a trunk or treat, but you do something kind of similar to a trunk or treat, or you do some kind of a Christmas, like drive-through Bethlehem type of a thing, or anyway, something like that. A lot of people will come to those, but you don't get a lot of contact, you don't get a lot of communication, and you don't build a lot of relationship. And then the last thing on the list here would be visitation. Visitation, I think, is pretty low on relationship because especially in today's world, nobody wants you to come to their door. But even when you did get to go to the door, it's a pretty low rate of return on people who actually want you to be at their door. And it's also pretty low exposure. So visitation is going to fit down here in the bottom left quadrant. But keep in mind that visitation often is the primary outreach method of a church. And churches, even though it's low relational and low exposure, it can be a target-rich environment. These are people who've already been to your church, so it's not going to be a big scatter fire, but it's kind of like sniper fire. It's focused, it's very particular, and it can be incredibly effective. Here's some homework that I want to give to you as you're working with your own team, thinking through this. What I want you to do is I want you to get with your team, not necessarily right now because we're going to be kind of pressed for time, but get with your team and look back over 2019. You don't have to look over 2020 because 2020, basically has just been a really crazy year. It's been a really difficult year for everybody. A lot of churches have had to mix up everything that they're doing and are just kind of trying to stay alive and survive. Now, in the midst of 2020, there are also some incredible opportunities for us as churches, but that's a different breakout. So just take 2019, take your calendar, and say, what did we do? What was our outreach that we try to do in our city? And I've worked with plenty of churches who looked back over the course of a year, and if we said, let's take away small groups, let's take away worship gatherings, the only outreach they did to their community all year was Vacation Bible School. And guys, I think we can do better. I think we have to do better. I think we have to get outside the walls of our own churches. So look over 2019 with your staff, with your key leaders, with your deacons, with your elders, and ask yourself this question: what does this outreach matrix tell us about our effectiveness of reaching out to our community? How effective are we at reaching out to our community? And maybe, just maybe, the reason that the cashier at Walmart doesn't know anything about your church is because you've not done anything to let them know that you even exist, to expose the community to the truth, to the fact that you exist. And it may be that tons of people know that you exist, but nobody's engaged because it's a bunch of drive-through events, and there's not anything that's offering them a chance to connect and spend time with you and get to know you. Maybe you already know that your church did nothing, and you're like, man, this breakout is a major bummer. This is seriously discouraging. Well, I want you to know, I'm not here to get you discouraged, but I do want you to face the reality that you're in. It's so important as leaders that we define reality. It's so important. I mean, the Great Commission that we have is not get into a building and gather as many people as possible, but to go into all the world, to go, like to be a going people. We have a going God, and we must be a going people. So I'm not going to leave you in the lurch of discouragement, but I do want to say this, that if we're ever going to reach our communities, we're going to have to learn how to think like a missionary. Learn to think like a missionary. Learn to evaluate things like you would a foreign missionary. If you sent a foreign missionary from your church into the mission field, he was going to a place where they spoke English. Let's say you were sending him to India, where the majority of the population there speaks English. And he's going into Delhi, one of the biggest cities in the whole world. And you've got a monthly report from him. And at the end of the first month, here's what he said: I know the names of 5 of my neighbors. Man, we'd be like, that's awesome. That's what we're talking about. We want you to know your neighbors' names. That's so fantastic. And then the next month he says, I've been eating at the same place for breakfast every day. And the waiters and the waitresses and the managers all know who I am. When I walk in, they know exactly what I'm going to order. I sit down. I'm a regular now. Man, we would think that was incredible. We would think that was so great. We got to learn how to think like a missionary, learn how to evaluate like a missionary. Stop thinking like this imperialistic thing that exists that everyone just has to come to. We got to get back our mean missional edge that says, we want to make friends. We want to build rhythms. We want to build connections. We want to understand our own community and know how to reach it. Jeremiah 29:7. This is the verse that my church uses to guide its local missional philosophy. It says, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you'll find your welfare. In its welfare, you find your welfare. And here's the great news about all of this. The great news about all of this. Your city has already built in all of the missional activities that you need. The work is already done for you. Not only has the event already been built, but the city is using its own money to promote the event. And not only is the city using its own money to promote the event, but there are already people planning on going to that event who would fit the category of this -10 to -2. In other words, the primary audience that you're trying to reach is already planning on going to certain things that are already paid for and planned out and promoted by your city. Costs you $0 to plan them, $0 to promote them, $0 to figure out how you're going to program them. It's all done. What you've got to do is you've got to find the rhythms of your cities. What do I mean by that? Every city has their own rhythms. They have their own things that they love to do. So they might have fall festivals. They might have a Route 66 kind of an event, some kind of a like fair at the park. They might have car shows, movies at the park, kids activities, kids events. They might have parades that you can be involved in. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And what you've got to do is start thinking like a missionary. This thing is already happening. An example for us is the Route 66 Festival. It takes place in Edwardsville the second weekend in June every year. It's a great event. We have thousands of people who go to it. And the first year that we went, we said, hey, what if we just set up a photo booth? Again, we didn't even have a worship gathering that was going at the time. So we said, let's set up a photo booth and we'll just make it a fun place for people to come and hang out. And while they're there, we'll tell them about our church. We'll tell them that we're going to be launching in the fall and see if we can build some relationships and talk to some people. So we set up a photo booth. We started taking pictures of people and we reached out to our city and said, hey, can we have permission to post to the Facebook page of Route 66 so that we can just put these right on the page? The city said, absolutely not. We don't do that. Totally understand. So we just Facebook messaged every single photo all day long. Well, the next year, they said, hey, would you do that photo booth again? We said, absolutely. But this time, we're also going to bring in a 1957 Chevy that's fully restored. We're going to park it right by our tent and let people look at it, get in it, take pictures of it, all that kind of stuff. So we sort of upped the ante a little bit. And they were like, oh, that's incredible. And midway through the event that second year, they came to us and they said, hey, we just made you, Rayden, an administrator of the Facebook page. Post all this stuff to the page, walk around, take pictures, post anything you want to post. The next year, we came back and we said, we're going to do that, our portrait tent. We're going to also have the car that's out there. And in addition to that, we're going to set up some games of cornhole, just bags that people can play. And on top of that, we're going to rent a fan, like a misting fan. And they were like, man, that's incredible. So we did all of that. Then the year after that, we did all those same things. And we said, we're going to pay for somebody to come out and do face painting all day long. We'll have a face painter all day long. We ended up having two because somebody else just volunteered and did it alongside of them. Anyway, whenever I was telling the city what we wanted to do, I'm sitting across the table from one of our city employees. And she said, she puts her pen down. She goes, okay, what do you want? And I said, I'm not sure what you mean. And she said, just tell me what you want. And I said, I don't want anything. I want to do something for my city. Our church wants to do something for the city. And she goes, look, nobody does this. Nobody lives like this. Nobody just gives stuff away without wanting something in return. And I was able to sit down with her and say, oh, you see, something incredible has happened to me. Something incredible has happened to our church. When we didn't deserve it and when we couldn't earn it, the God of all creation loved us. And his love has filled us so much that it overflows and it spills out on everybody that's close to us. And all we want to do is be a living, breathing reminder that Jesus Christ loves the city of Edwardsville, Illinois. We're going to live and die on that hill right there. We're going to bless this city. We're going to love this city. We're going to make sure everybody knows that we think this is the greatest city in the world. We're going to do everything that we can to promote it, to just be generous towards it. This is the key. This is the key to all this, guys. You don't have to be a genius, but you do have to be generous. And here's what we found as a church, that as we open up our hands to our city, God has opened up his hands to us. We are by no means a wealthy church, but we have had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to love, to serve, and to bless and to encourage our church. Even during this COVID season, our church has been responsible for helping give away something like 1 million pounds of food right here in the metro east of St. Louis. It's been incredible. Guys, you can do this where you are. You can do it. Start exactly where you are, with exactly what you have. You might have enough money in your account to do one thing. Chances are good you have more resources than you know about. Most local associations have some kind of a block party trailer. I bet your state convention would help you out with that. I'm not part of it, so I can just kind of elbow them a little bit and say, you guys should have that and should give that away to other churches that need it. Maybe, just maybe, there are other churches that would partner with you. All that to say, you have the resources that you need to do something. And that's what this is about. That's how you become that church, is you stop thinking like this established thing that people are just expected to know about and gravitate towards, and you instead say, how can we be generous with the place that God has placed us? Like, how can we be generous with the place and the people where God has strategically put us? Before the foundations of the world were laid, before a single tree was created, before a single animal breathed air into its lungs, God knew that he was going to put your church in your city. That's not nothing, guys. The question that we've got to ask is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do with the moment that we've been given, with the church that we've been given, and with the resources that we've been given? And I want to challenge you to become that church that rents a kangaroo, that makes snow cones and gives them away, that sets up some kind of a fun little picture studio at an event, that just says, this event in our city is happening, and we just want to come along and just make it better. All we're here to do is just make it better. So the next big festival that our city puts on, we're going to hire a juggler. We're going to volunteer man hours for the kids area. We're just going to serve. We're going to love, and we're going to be blessed. God has been incredibly generous with us, and we must be generous with the cities where he has placed us. I love you guys. I'm so proud of you. If I can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can email me at rayden.hollis@gmail.com, RAYDEN.HOLLIS@gmail.com. Let me pray for us and we'll close this session. God, thank you so much for every one of these leaders. I'm asking you to fill them with your spirit, to give them a passion to love, to bless, to generously and freely and liberally give to the cities in which you have called and placed their churches. God, let us be creative. Let us be passionate. Let us make a difference with the time that we have been given. We love you. All that we do is for you, Jesus. Help us to win our city to you. In your name we pray. Amen.